Beautiful. That was a little jam based on a free John Mayer style jam track that Your Guitar Academy have, and we'll link to that in the top corner up here if you fancy having a quick jam with some lead guitar licks. But this episode of Another Guitar Show is all about what music theory do you need to know, and also, frankly, what you don't. Aiming towards perhaps being able to do something at both this kind of level from a rhythm and lead point of view, and just practical tips for the everyday guitar player who doesn't have hours and hours to practice every day. You know, what do you need to know? What do you need to prioritize at different stages and at different levels of guitar? I'm going to start off by posing the question, what is music theory?
Yeah.
How would you answer that question, for example?
It's something that humans have organized to be able to, I think, transfer knowledge about music a little bit easier. But it's
absolute nail on the head.
It's ethereal, isn't it?
I couldn't put it any better, and that is sometimes the struggle with music theory that I think a lot of practical guitar players have, because a lot of it is just putting names to stuff that you already know how to do. So why would you perhaps prioritize all the time it takes to memorize the names or specific positions or how things can be written, when you can get so far along the line from, for example, spending more time working on ear training, which was something that we looked at in the last episode, which we'll link to down in the description, the last episode of Another Guitar Show. But I think you're exactly right there, where there's this separation of actually what we're playing and then transferring that knowledge so that others can learn from it, but so that we can learn ourselves to better organize the stuff that we perhaps know. And I would like to make the point of what we traditionally call music theory that really applies to guitar players is a separate thing to sight reading from the stave, from the musical notation. I would treat them as a separate thing, at least for most practical guitar players. My example is pretty much all of my favorite guitar players and songwriters and artists in the world that have sold out stadiums and arenas and had #1 albums for the last 50 or so years, most of them can't read music. Does that mean they don't know musical theory? No, they absolutely do. Otherwise, they could not create the music that they create. They write this stuff. And then I teach this because people want to learn it. It's that good.
Yeah.
It does have a staggering amount of music theory in it, but that perhaps was learned in numerous ways, not just from sight reading off a page. Now, sight reading in particular can be very helpful, but typically guitar players, we tend to rely more on tab for the simple fact that this one note on guitar, which is the thinnest E string, can be played in so many different positions that I would argue that the traditional notation, as in on the score with a treble clef and a bass clef, is inefficient to actually learn guitar from because it doesn't tell you the position. What it does tell you is the rhythm and the pitch. And that is the main focus of the kind of music theory that you want to learn. At what stage did this become crucial for you? Was this something right at the start, that's how you learnt everything? Or where did this really come into play for you? From a practical, sense of wanting to get better at playing guitar.
It just kind of, through the lessons I was having, the information just got drip fed to me.
And was it typically one-to-one lessons, or was that through college or school or anything?
One-to-one. Just got kind of drip fed to me.
Which it should be, through the songs you're learning, applicable to the scales.
And the courses I was doing, I was doing like the guitar exam, stuff like that. And there's a lot of stuff in there as you get to the higher levels about kind of deeper understanding of diatonic theory, just kind of how things relate to each other, and playing through them. So a lot of it was, if I put this chord chart in front of you, can you analyze it and tell me what it is and how to play over it and what you could do that on top of it? Which
is exactly where we started this video, because I played some chords which were in the key of C sharp minor. How can you play over that? Is essentially knowing how to do that is music theory, and that's the music theory that I would personally want to encourage most people to look at, We've said previously that the average guitar player tends to need a little bit of encouragement, pushing over the edge at starting to play lead guitar and also starting to improvise, which is exactly what you were doing there, fabulously as well. I can't wait to pick apart more of your John Mayer style licks and stuff. Oh man, let's go for it. But just knowing how the chords work first of all, and then being able to solo over them is the music theory that we're going to be focusing on in this video. So there's a bit of an ordering to this.
Yeah.
This all starts with knowing diatonic chords, and along with that, just the knowledge of the notes that exist. Knowing that there's essentially, we start from A and we go to G in what we would call our kind of Western music. And between all of those notes or pitches, there's a sharp and a flat, which can be called either way. So we have A going to A sharp, but that note can also be called B flat. That's again something to get your head around, but that is just that's what we traditionally call the notes. Again, to be able to communicate, it's not just 5th fret, for example, it is an A note. And then from there is no note between E and F, and no note between B and C. Hence the Simpson joke, Homer's band being called the B sharps.
Gets funnier. What was it? Gets funnier. Gets less funny every time you hear it.
It is true, as most musician jokes do. Let's be honest with you.
Can you just go into a little bit, just an explanation of what you used the word diatonic?
Yes. So diatonic means from the tonic, I believe, and the tonic is the one chord. And this is all working on or explaining major scale harmony. In the previous lesson on ear training, we looked at the major scale and a little bit into how degrees of that major scale or notes from that major scale give us the melodies, but also the chords that make up any song. And that's what we can dig a little more deeper into now, essentially. So my explanation of that would be using C major as an example.
Always a good place to start.
Why would I possibly use C major?
Well, the reason he does it is because there's no sharps or flats in that key.
Which is the definition of a key as well. I think we should point out before we start with this, how many sharps or flats are in the song. That gives us the key. And we'll explain more from there as we get to those bits. But it's not necessarily the first scale that most guitarists learn, but the first scale that you would learn on a piano, which is just all the white keys, would be the C major scale. And this should be one of the first scales that you learn on guitar, the C major scale, which is literally do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. From that would give us all the melodic notes that would work in the key of C. So all the notes that the singer would sing, and all the notes that someone would play on a solo. All those notes do exist there, or the letter names of them. The thing that you might not realise is every chord that would happen in a song, typically, so for example C, D minor, E minor, F, G and A minor, every one of those chords that I just played is made up only from the notes in that C major scale. Those notes might be lower. They can be outside of that one octave that I just played before, which was C to C. But every one of those chords is only made up of the naturals. No sharps or flats. The white keys on a piano. That is a brief explanation of diatonic harmony and where you should start with this. What we can then do, and often our first point of call with this, is to give numbers to the chords that happen in a song. Why do we give them numbers?
So it helps with transposition, changing that for one.
No matter what key you're in, the same numbers apply and they sound the same. So when we go, for example, from a C to an F, a nice chilled...
Nice campfire.
Oh yeah, man. Every Bob Dylan song ever. That sounds essentially the same as going D to G. Proportionate to the one chord, or the tonic, which there is D, but we try and focus on C. But this would work throughout the neck, and is something that we've looked at in previous episodes of Another Guitar Show, which were like the blues guitar episode, or how to solo on acoustic guitar, all that kind of stuff. But this is a bit more by the book, by the letter.
All 12 keys, that exact same thing. Now, just as a quick, because this is all very formulaic, you follow just set patterns, it helps to learn the order of chords in a major key. So just 1 through 7, each of those numbers has an assigned chord, and that is it for the major scale. It's always the same. So when he said C to F, 1 to 4, that's always major to a major.
1, 4, and 5 are always major. 2, 3, and 6 are always minor most of the time. So from a diatonic, very important to know. From a diatonic chords point of view, they are always minor from a theory point of view. However, most songs stick mostly to that. But real songs, to make them sound interesting, which is what they're trying to do. Songwriters write songs to make you like the sound of it. They're not trying to teach you anything through the song. We're trying to teach you stuff through the song. So they can do sneaky little tricks. But from a theory point of view, from the actual chords, what works by the book, 1, 4, and 5 are always major. 2, 3, and 6 are always minor.
And the 7, we've had this before,
is
the boogeyman.
Exactly, because typically the 7th is a diminished chord sticking to exactly what we've said there. And practically that never happens. What we use is a substitution. Use something else that sounds a little bit cooler. In the key of C, that is typically a slash chord. Something like C/B.
So what's a slash chord?
Slash chord is where we have a normal chord, like a C chord, so that is the first part of the slash, but the root note is replaced for something else, in this case, a B. When that happens, it doesn't have to be exact. In this case, it's not fully the same as a C chord, and we've just changed the root note. The finger positions or the notes we use can change per chord. It's never exact. It's like it's a shorthand way for describing what's happening, which I found a very easy thing to understand, because it's kind of like if you play piano or keyboard and you just play a C chord in the right hand but change the root note or the bass note in the left hand, the chord appears like it's changed, but one hand or the higher notes have stayed the same. Guitarists tend to have a harder time separating the low notes from the high notes. We see them all as one.
Yeah, and the same thing.
And the sooner we can start to understand, especially with this diatonic harmony idea, sooner you can understand that the bass note is controlling the chord, but we can almost leave the higher notes the same. The same thing kind of happens in the key of G, where you can play all the diatonic chords, but we almost keep at least the same thing as 2 strings throughout the entire song, and that is something, basically playing the chords of Wonderwall or a G chord, D sus4 and a C add 9, which I'm sure most of you watching at home are familiar with. So I've changed key there. I've gone from the very easy key of C major, not super easy because we've already got a bar chord in there.
Yeah.
So there are easier keys and harder keys, but it's a C. As soon as you're learning the chords in the key of C, C, D minor, E minor, F, G, and A minor, that's when you need to start applying this theory, because you know enough chords for this to be really, really helpful for you. The next more guitar-friendly key, and a very easy key that you should be learning, is G, which we know most of the chords in the key of G. But just to summarize, your 1 is G, A minor, B minor is the minor third, C major is 4, D is 5, E minor is 6, and then we tend to have either a slash chord, or the D with the F sharp in the bass, or even an F.
Not to say that playing a diminished is incorrect. It's just about ugly sounding naked, isn't it?
It's not pleasant. It's not as pleasant on the ear, but there is a little quirk of theory that works with it as well. And the one way that the learning the theory side of things helps you to learn songs quicker is being able to spot that sooner. And this is what we did in the previous episode with the ear training.
You'll notice a lot of links between the two.
They really go together as a pair, these last 2 lessons. So if you haven't watched our previous video on the ear training side of things, they're both very complementary. But what we challenged each other to do in the previous episode was work out a chord sequence by ear. And the way we worked that out by ear was, first of all, spotting what the 1-4-5 was, or whatever the diatonic sequence was, and then after that actually giving the chords a name. Because once you get used to certain sounds, like the 1 to the 4 or 1 to 5 as the most obvious examples, I mean, there's every 3-chord pop song. There's every 12-bar blues kind of chord sequence. And they're great places to start actually applying this theory, because it's easy to kind of change key and all that kind of thing. So where the previous episode where we looked at ear training and this lesson on theory lesson first really meet is in a concept known as cadences, which are how we can work out music and songs by ear in the most distinctive way. And it's the easiest one to communicate. So that's where I want to start this, with an explanation and being able to tell what diatonic chords sound like. Cadences are how something resolves, and whether it resolves or whether it doesn't resolve. So if I play the C chord, and we're treating that as the 1 chord in the key of C, and then I strum a G chord, if that was where my song kind of finished, it would feel unfinished. It's kind of like 2, 3, 4, 1. Kind of like throwing a ball in the air, but it doesn't come down. You're waiting for something. There is a suspense. And then if we go, we can feel straight away, comparatively, that sounds like it's finished, like it's resolved. And that is when you can typically realize that you've come back to the 1 chord. And in this case, gone from 1, 5, 1. And we can use a similar kind of process to work out what any chord is, especially if it's coming from a diatonic point of view, from knowing our intervals from there. But this is the clearest way to kind of show anyone, even if you believe you're tone deaf, even if you believe you cannot tell the difference between one chord and another, hearing for the resolve and a finished sort of kind of finality, and then that unresolved tension is the biggest way into this from your average kind of guitar player, because everyone can feel a tension and a release when that tension is released, and that is actually all music and notation is at its core. Different degrees of tension and release. So giving this its proper names, which is what we try and do in music theory, just to be able to communicate this stuff better. Going from the 1, 5 to the 1 is a perfect cadence, and then the 1 that would finish on the 5, and that is how the sequence or progression would finish. That is an imperfect cadence. The other common one is called a plagal, which goes to the 4, which has a different personality to it. This is the same process happening. So that was a plagal cadence, but it did resolve, okay? But it doesn't have that same as strong a pull, or as again a kind of.
It's not as tense. That's the thing.
It's a little more chilled. Like I played the 1 to the 4 before, and it sounded like a Bob Dylan song. It's just a little more chilled. And of course, you could be listening for there, like we looked at in our ear training episode, for the root notes, to know whether that was a 1 to a 4 or a 1 to a 5. But that is where I would normally introduce this idea of diatonic chords and diatonic harmony to students, because it suddenly connects. It's suddenly like a reason to learn it. You can see the doors that will open. And that's a way that anybody can do it. I've got a few lessons on that, which I will link to on my website. You guys have kind of a full music theory course, I think, and probably some ear training stuff as well, which we will also link to in the description on YouTube and on our websites. But yes, that is a really solid way into music theory that's really practical that I'm sure everyone can see the use of. And that is really, we only have half an hour here, and we try and keep this show entertaining. So what we try and do is try and give you the breadcrumbs to leave you guys to wherever you're at, whether you're a total beginner or whether you've been playing for years and have fantastic skills, but maybe you're not getting out of the instrument what you wanted. That is giving you guys practically a way forward. After diatonic chords and knowing a key, how can someone therefore, most people really have the goal, and what helps here is to know the chords in a key and then be able to play over it.
Yeah.
What is someone's first steps into that going to be? That sounded like Yoda saying that sentence. That was awful. Grammar, Andy, grammar. Music teacher, not English teacher. I'll say that again. What is the best way for someone to get into that exact skill, like we started this episode with?
So playing over different chord sequences, right? So it comes back.
But I now can't edit that out now. We'll have to keep all of that in. But go ahead. Go again.
It's like take it all the way back to the first thing we said was the major scale, or understanding what the key is. So applying those individual notes, not as chords, but just as melodic notes against the chords that we're playing. So if we've got something in C.
And we'll be thinking, starting with either choosing the major scale or the minor pentatonic.
Right.
That is going to pretty much cover every musical situation because it covers every major or minor key. There are reasons to learn more than that, but that's where you've got to start. If a chord sequence plays and you think, I don't know, I got nothing, where do we start? That's where you start. So, for example, I play this, which is a C to an F chord.
C to F, right.
Straight away, the presumption would be we're in the key of C major.
Right.
And
so I'm listening to the cadences to kind of give me an idea of which is the one, which is the four. I get that sense. So I've determined it's in C. So I can go, let's go with a C major scale, it's the most obvious. Now, where you play it does not matter because it's all the notes, it's all the same notes. So I'm just going to pick this area. So
that was the major scale in position 1.
In what I like to call as an E shape. So I'll just give it a little bit of boost. See, suddenly.
Now, when you play a major scale, it's suddenly kind of got that John Mayer vibe to it.
Yeah, it does.
But when someone else plays the C major scale, it sounds like. So what steps can we take to keep playing that as a bed? What steps can we take?
Just a few little stops in the order is enough to make it into something.
It's true. Keep playing exactly like that. Let me show you the steps. Step number 1, I would believe, if you've never done this before ever, just play the scale up and down. Start there. Play over it and just see what happens from there naturally. Just to check that this is the right scale as well. And you're probably going to start by playing it exactly on the beat, so maybe. And maybe coming back down as soon as you get to the octave would be fine. As soon as you start doing that, just add a pause and then continue. From there, you can shake up the rhythm even more, but for most people, practically, don't change the order just yet. So, anything else you know how to do? Sliding? But I've not actually gone out of scale order yet. Because most melodies do actually keep playing that as well. Most melodies do go in scale order, but every 4 to 6 notes, there's some significant jump in there. So maybe a 1 to 5. suddenly it's sounding more melodic. Which, if you pause there, that is what I would be looking for first of all, especially when you're thinking about this from an understanding the theory point of view.
Yeah.
We're not
doing
that kind of thing, specifically because of the musical situation as well. We're in the key of C.
Exactly.
It's a chilled, relaxed
campfire
kind of thing. We could add some licks in there, but typically we're thinking a melody point of view and adding phrasing. Slides, bends, slides, and vibrato.
Yeah.
If the key or the musical situation was a bit more rocky or a little bit more bluesy, I'd be using that as a blueprint to tell me already, to give me things to work from as to what to play lead-wise. But that musical situation is major and chilled.
Yeah.
I guess the other obvious one that people may be kind of shouting out and commenting would be to use the major pentatonic.
Of course.
In my experience of teaching, most people find that it's tougher to implement that into your playing naturally when you're not comfortable, first of all, using the major scale and then the minor pentatonic. I choose to teach them as when I'm passing this on and I've had better results at people just being happier when they're playing their kind of lead lines. Keep them separate, first of all. Major scale, minor for blues and rock type stuff, which entirely depends on the chords underneath it, not just the genres. You can have a rock song that sounds like this, you know, but typically that's the way to separate it. Your minor, let's say we have a blues or a rock song that is in A, your minor pentatonic would work over this because the chords in the song will probably be using root notes from the minor pentatonic scale or an associated scale with that, Dorian or anything. But with minor pentatonic first, that would be it. So those would be my two examples. Those of you that are more advanced at this can have a go at doing this over the other jam tracks that your Guitar Academy have. And you have a lot of player studies with this as well, don't you? And I'm sure you got backing tracks with that.
We do, yeah.
So useful for those of you that want a bit more, you know, a bit more variety than perhaps what beginners can cope with. But anyone, and when I say beginners as well, you know, people might have been playing a couple of years or longer, but still be very new to lead playing. And you can feel like a beginner again when someone plays a chord sequence or you hear a song and you think, I've got to play it. Like, it's like starting again in many ways. It isn't starting again, it just feels like that way, and that is totally normal. So for those of you that need a little bit more help there, starting in the key of C for any guitar player, electric or acoustic in any genre, is a great place to start because we've got more intervals in there, we've got more notes, we've got more content, and you'll hear the qualities of it and you'll learn more from it essentially. Most people, typically when they're starting with this, it's over some kind of rock jam track in the key of A, and we're learning how to do this kind of thing. That is great and a great place to start, but that would be a more intrinsically more licks-based way of learning, because licks work better over this rather than a melody that's using the things that we looked at earlier. So from a theory and kind of learning your intervals and things, it's very limiting, which is why a lot of players get stuck, I think, because they get stuck in that minor pentatonic rut, I guess. But if you are in, you know, that's where you're at now, and you could play over a rock song in the key of A with those sorts of licks, but you can't do anything else other than that, C major scale. And then changing the key, still using the major scale or the minor pentatonic in a variety of keys, and then exploring, starting to use maybe if it's in the key of C, the C major pentatonic, and starting to blend. Blend from the more melodic approach, if you play those chords again. But starting to also use some of the bluesy bends and tricks the when you do that, because we're in the key of C and not the key of A, we're not going to finish our licks here, we finish them there. So rather than going, which is still in A, just finish on a C note. And suddenly, and even thinking about finishing or adding a note from the chord, or any kind of, any licks that you know. We all, pause there, we all have our own kind of trick bag from the songs that we've learnt, from the licks and stuff like that. But that would be my way into improvising, which is the most practical use of music theory knowledge. If you can do that, you know music theory. And there are ways forward from there, but that's the most practical way into it and the most practical reason to do it. You can't really do what we've just demoed there, even from a basic point of view, without some knowledge of music theory. There are, of course, so many other aspects to this that we will delve into in future episodes, not least of all rhythms, being able to not only know how rhythms are written, but be able to copy them exactly and to, know your quavers from your demi-semi-quavers, I guess, and we're not talking about crisps. What else would you say is important from a music theory point of view once someone is able to do what we've just demoed there? Take any typical backing track and play something appropriate over it, which is, I would say, that's at a pretty good standard. There's always some jam track that's going to catch out most guitarists. Really.
Yeah,
I'm sure there'll be one that catches me out. But where would be a good way forward for those more advanced students? What would you recommend for someone who can do what we've demonstrated there, but is perhaps in the pentatonic rut or it's sounding a bit samey? What's the next level from a music theory point of view?
So the pentatonic rut is a very common kind of drainage pipe to get stuck in. But in terms of theory, it's all just about sound palettes in a sense. If you want to get past that, increase your palette. So maybe take from a pentatonic, you can go to a Dorian. Now we've got suddenly a little slight difference. We've got a couple of extra notes. One note in particular, because it's a mode, is outside of a natural minor scale. So there's only one note difference, but it can make a huge sound. And you've just suddenly got this new ingredient to help you when you're playing. Another thing,
which is so just to illustrate that which mode was it you said? So was it Dorian? Dorian. So that's such a well-used scale that we're all used to hearing, but because for many reasons it can be hard for some people to get a grip on. But certainly to increase that sound palette, the Dorian mode and the Mixolydian mode are kind of the big two. And the Mixolydian mode is harder for people to get the head around, but you already know the sound of it because it's where, and I would say this is where you want to connect the lead playing more to the rhythm of the track. Give it context to the music that you're playing over. So, for example, if we're playing, if we're playing our same kind of C to F, but we're adding other chords in there. We're still in the key of C, and it's using the C major scale until we use the very common chord of that dominant 7.
Right.
And therefore that chord steps out of that major scale framework, and it's using some black keys, okay? That's what it would be using on the piano keyboard, and that root note is from Mixolydian mode. That's the only note that's any different. All of the other chords, though, all the other notes that make up this chord are kind of out of key. I think you were right in saying that with all of them. Apart from one, the D note's in there. So you want to make what you're playing closer match the rhythm, and anything that's interesting or spicy out of whatever the color of the chords are, whether it's an add 9 or a sus2 or anything, reflect that in your lead line. Use it. You mentioned once. Scales are like spices. Yeah. And if you put chili in something, you want to be able to taste it. So if there's something in the rhythm that's a little bit tasty, you want to reflect that in the lead line.
I find people get really bogged down by this kind of stuff, and it can.
They shouldn't. A really easy way as well to approach this. Often when we're thinking of soloing over a chord sequence, we think about being in one scale for the entire song, and that is correct. And that's from a starting point. But whenever the chord changes in the song as well, we can often treat that like that's suddenly our key. So if I was on C to F, but we were on each chord for longer, which often happens if it's kind of a riff. Something a bit more like that, what would really work, can you play something similar to that, just where you're on C and F? Okay. What I was doing there was changing the key that I was in, or changing the scale I was using per chord. Mm-hmm. That's a really simple example because that's C to F, but I was using to start with the C major pentatonic and then F, which is what riffs do all the time, but people struggle to implement that into their lead playing because you think, I'm in the key of C, we're using the C major scale or something fancier than that, but often just follow the chord with the basic stuff you know already, and you get something that's a lot more musically exciting. That's an example of that. Trying to think of songs that use exactly that, and I'm not thinking of any, and I'm usually pretty good at that. Well, a lot of rock riffs, actually. So even like something as simple as, something that most people will know as well. What's the key of that riff or that song?
So, well, because it's power chords.
But what's the key? Well,
I would go with D minor.
D minor, D rock. It's a blues scale, so D blues. All of that is kind of meaning the same thing. And again, we're just trying to communicate to you guys what we mean by this. Then the riff changes key to the 4 chord. And comes back to the 1. If I'm soloing over that, you don't have to. You could just stay in D and use D Dorian and a mix of the D major pentatonic and D minor pentatonic, D, D, D. Or when we go to that G chord and the riff becomes G, you could just change your whole scale to G. And I think I'd like to kind of jam that now.
You've got to modulate it.
It's a really good example. So that's the D chord, or the riff in D. And that's the D minor pentatonic. So we're going to change to G, and we'll move it to G. G minor pentatonic. Back to D. Finishing there back in D, I purposely then used just position 1 of the minor pentatonic for each of those chords. D is here, G, and then A. Again, for that whole solo, I could have just stayed in the key of D, and the actual Sunshine of Your Love solo kind of mixes major and minor pentatonic in a really good way for you guys to kind of learn that. But what I wanted to show there is every time the chord changes, we can follow that and essentially change key and use whatever, there I was sticking to minor pentatonic or the blues scale, because that's the notes that are in the riff. And you want to make sure, just for the most effective lead lines that you can play, that what you're kind of singing in the lead line is matching what the choir's singing in the rhythm. Because
it wouldn't sound as interesting if you just played D minor over the whole thing, especially because you're on different chords for such long periods of time.
Absolutely.
It would just kind of really start to bore you, blend
well,
yourself?
This is where we can get into lead guitarist syndrome, where every time a solo happens, the lead guitarist is doing his thing, and the band are kind of there going, I hope he stops soon. And we've all been to those kind of gigs, but we can also, most of us would envy the person that can do that because they have a great amount of skill.
Yeah.
But it can lack taste if we're not following what's happening in the rhythm parts. And that, my friends, is music theory, absolutely. Being able to spot it from a listening point of view, being able to spot it from seeing the chords or the tab written down and going, I know what will work over that, and also knowing what it's using, what your riffs are using, what scale they're using, what note choices and chord choices they're using to help you learn them quicker. Those are the reasons that I would be encouraging you guys to pay a bit more attention to your music theory, but that's what it is. It is not necessarily learning to read the notes on the page or even increasing your knowledge of sight reading at all. And I think that is a massive misconception that puts a lot of people off learning. And I know it's a common guitarist thing to say, but it's never, learning more music theory is never going to make your playing worse. You just have to know what to learn to make it have real impact, to make it better. And those would be our examples of what to kind of cover. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've stuck to the end of the music theory episode of Another Guitar Show. You guys are our kind of guys. That's pretty hardcore. So that's fantastic. Please subscribe to the Andy Guitar YouTube channel and also the Your Guitar Academy YouTube channel if you're new over here. The episodes ping pong every Sunday between the two YouTube channels. But this, Another Guitar Show, is your free 30-minute guitar lesson every Sunday. Thank you so much for Thomas for sharing his knowledge with us. It's really fun to do, and we hope to see you all next time.